Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people began before October 2023 and is well documented in pictures and statements. Alternative Policy Solutions interviewed Brendan O'Hara, the Scottish National Party MP who was elected in 2015. Brendan O'Hara is well known for his critique of Israeli policies and campaign to end the British arms supply to Israel. In this year's commemoration of the Palestinian Nakba, we zoom in on the genocide in Gaza, worldwide student protests, and the role of media outlets.
And no country, regardless of who they are, in the name of self-defense, can kill civilians.
It's catastrophic. It's utterly catastrophic. I think what we've seen, it's pushing that civilian population from the north to the south. There's almost a scorched earth policy of making Gaza completely uninhabitable, and to have 1.5 million people essentially pushed up against the wall in Rafah on that Egyptian border, and for Netanyahu to then say that he will go ahead with his offensive regardless of what happens. It will be a bloodbath. If that happens, if that is allowed to happen, it will be an absolute humanitarian catastrophe, because these people have got nowhere to go. And the rumour at the moment is that Israel want them to return to Khan Yunis, but Khan Yunis has been obliterated. And to move 1.5 million people from Rafah to Khan Yunis in that time scale, in a time of peace, would be well nigh impossible. To ask for 1.5 million people, beleaguered, war-weary people, to be moved from Rafah to Khan Yunis in a time of war, returning to an obliterated city, it's a knowingly impossible ask. And if the offensive against Rafah goes ahead, it will be an unimaginable humanitarian catastrophe. And we have made this point time and again to the UK government. They know. Well, I mean, my personal opinion is that Netanyahu can't afford for this war to stop, because the minute this stops, then the attention turns on Netanyahu, and his political future, his personal future, I don't know where that would lie. So he almost has to keep this going, I think, to keep the attention away from him. And they went into this conflict, and they didn't, from my looking of it, there seemed to be no strategy, and it was based on, and some might argue with justification, an understandable desire for revenge. I mean, what happened on October the 7th was absolutely dreadful, and I absolutely condemn it. But nation states cannot be fueled by revenge. And if they are, and if they do react with revenge, then at some point, very quickly, they've got to regain their composure, because the world can't act on nation states acting in a vengeful manner. And what we have now is just this almost continued lust for revenge. And that has resulted in the deaths of in excess of 30,000 Palestinian civilians, the absolute destruction, the obliteration of Gaza and its civilian infrastructure. And where does it end? How does this end? Because yes, you may have a stated ambition to remove Hamas, but with every bomb and with every civilian that is killed by those bombs, you're storing up problems, not just for yourself, but for the region and essentially for the rest of the world as well. Oh yes, absolutely. They are painfully aware of it. And I can only speak directly for the UK, but I and others of my colleagues, every time there has been an escalation or an atrocity, we have questioned the foreign ministers and the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister. So they know, they are absolutely, completely aware of what's happening in Gaza. There's nothing that happens in Gaza that they are unaware of. And it's all on the record that they have been asked, but still they insist that Israel is not in breach of international humanitarian law, and that because they are not in breach of international humanitarian law, the United Kingdom is still within its legal rights to supply arms to Israel. So they know, they absolutely know. Well, they know, but unfortunately they have chosen to continue to support Israel almost unquestioningly. Well, I think my job and the job of my colleagues in the Scottish National Party is to continually shine a light and continually question and oppose what the UK government are doing. I think had we not been here, had there not been the Scottish National Party presence at Westminster, then I don't think very much of this would have been discussed. A cosy consensus would have arisen around the support, almost unquestioning support for Israel, because the Labour Party opposition in the UK are very, very closely aligned with the government on this. So we are, if you like, that voice. And what I always find absolutely fascinating is that when you have that political, that consensus that emerges around the political establishment, on this occasion, it is so far out of step with the people on these islands. The people of the United Kingdom, I think, are, and as poll after poll has shown, are very, very much opposed to what the British government are doing, and very, very much opposed to what's happening in Gaza. So you have a political establishment which is actually out of step with the people. There are millions of people take to the streets of the UK, every major city in the UK, on a regular basis, demanding a ceasefire, demanding an end to arms sales. But as I say, that British political establishment are turning a deaf ear to them, and they're simply not listening to them. And that's what our job is, to amplify that voice inside Parliament. It can be. I don't think it will be. I think that the UK government appear determined to continue with their policy of arms sales. I think that what I tried to do was to bring parliamentarians and NGOs and charities and other groups together to think, well, how do we advance this case of stopping arms sales? My problem with all of this is that for a member of parliament, there is very little scrutiny on what the government does. So how the government makes its decisions, on what legal basis does the UK government allow licenses to be given to export arms to Israel, because it's all shrouded in secrecy at the moment. And so we're trying to, a group of us in Parliament are trying to shine a light and trying to get a debate on that process which allows arms sales from the UK to Israel to happen. And it was a really good meeting. We had about, I think we had about 25 members of Parliament attend, which is quite quite good on a busy Tuesday. We had a lot, and we had some good updates from the people who are taking the UK government to court at the moment. We had Human Rights Watch, we had Amnesty, we had a whole range of NGOs. So it was a useful discussion, but I think the problem we face is a lack of political will from the UK government to do this. I think that would be a naive expectation. I think that we need a voice of protest. We need to make sure that those who do legislate know that they are not doing with the support of the people. But I think it would be incredibly naive for a British politician or an American politician to believe that their legislators take stock of public opinion when they don't necessarily have to. And I think on this occasion, the UK, and I presume as well, although I'm not an expert, America as well, would have far too much to lose. And they've already expended so much political capital in supporting Israel that they're almost so far down that line. So they're out of step, they're out of touch with the people, but I think there are bigger influences at play that would suggest that I don't think Richie Sunak or Joe Biden are about to change tack anytime soon, unfortunately. But I think what we've got to do is ensure, certainly in terms of arms sales, that the UK are not breaking international humanitarian law, and that what Israel is doing, we constantly, the SNP constantly in Westminster talk about breaches of international humanitarian law, and it is making sure that the UK government can never say that they did not know. When all this blows over and when the investigations take place, the UK government can never say that they were unaware, because we have put it on the record time and time again that there are the most egregious breaches of international humanitarian law, and the UK government are by their actions complicit. It's really interesting that I think it's only when you go abroad or you access foreign media channels that you realise how much, no matter how independent our press is, but it's more seeing it through someone else's prism is incredibly insightful. So, for example, the Foreign Affairs Committee was in Brazil last week, talking to the Brazilian government about all various sort of multilaterals. But watching it and seeing what Brazil do through their own prism as opposed to a sort of Northern European prism was absolutely fascinating. And it's the beauty now is with these sort of having thousands of channels on your television is you can watch Al Jazeera, you can watch a whole host of other news outlets, and it's only then you realise just how I'm not going to say it's not biased, but it's askew. It skews towards a world view that comes from Northern Europe, and it's perfectly understandable that it does, because that is our view on the world as a Northern European view. But it's when you go to the Middle East or you go to South America, you get a completely different view. So I wouldn't necessarily criticise the independent media because in the UK, because they see things through the prism that they're brought up to see things through. But I would encourage people to try and get another view of it by looking through someone else's prism. It's never, ever a bad thing. I don't think it was necessarily created by it. I think that what we have in Gaza, unlike probably any other conflict, is the ability to access it ourselves. So whether it's on social media or however, people can access almost in real time what's happening. So you don't have to wait for the national news to come on and bring you a report from a correspondent based in Jerusalem or a correspondent who's embedded with the IDF. What you can do now is you go onto your phone or your computer and you can access directly footage from Gaza itself, and you can see for yourself. So I think that's been a real game changer in how people have approached it. People haven't waited to be told what to think about it, because they can access it themselves. And people are not stupid. People know that this has been going on for 50 years. People know that there have been intifadas. People know that, the plight of the Palestinians has been a running sore in the world for decades. And so this didn't suddenly start last year. This is a continuation of what's been going on for an awful long time. So people, I think, started from a pretty high knowledge base, and therefore were able to access and understand and make decisions for themselves. And that's why when the British political establishment said, this is a position that we are going to take, the people said, no, that's not the position that the people are going to take. And so that's why there is such a disconnect between that political establishment in the UK and the people of these islands. If you want my political answer, I'll give you my human answer first. I hope and pray that it stops soon. My heart breaks for the people of Gaza. It's unimaginable. It's absolutely unimaginable what is happening. And I don't think that any human being could look at what's happening there and think that it is justified or allowable or in any way, shape or form acceptable. It is simply not. What's happening there is it's a stain on the world, and we should, as the world, we should hang our heads in shame for allowing it to happen. My political answer is this will continue until people outside of Israel make it stop. I remember reading the foreign minister from South Africa, who said that the people who can best dictate the ceasefire date are the people who sell Israel their weapons. So if you stop replenishing their stocks, they'll have nothing left to fire. And I think, unfortunately, that's kind of where we are. Israel seems hell-bent on continuing this, and therefore it is up to the people outside of Israel to make this stop. But right now, there doesn't seem to be that political will to make it stop, and I think that this will go down as one of the darkest moments in recent world history.